You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, we just came off of a somewhat successful video for us, but a little bit harrowing when we did that Season 3 Mandalorian leak, because we got a little bit of a copyright. It wasn't really a strike, but what they did was they blocked it. So I had to go in and, try to edit it, and now it's back up, and it's gotten even more views. So in a way, we're kind of doing the sequel to this thing, because that day, Monday, when we went out and we were all ready to do this thing, this trailer that we're going to talk about tonight dropped. And of course, Ronaldo's here joining us today, so that's good. Just want to say hello to all the viewers. And as a reminder, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. There's a link in the description where if you are so inclined, you can donate to us. And we appreciate really any support you guys give us. So you still haven't seen the trailer, right?
I've seen it off and on just because I've been in places where it's popped up, but yeah, I haven't seen it.
Okay. Yeah, because I haven't, only time, I've seen like the first scene or two of it, only because of the fact that obviously I had to get the video into our streaming software and everything and test it. But yeah, I haven't seen it. So the thing is, if I remember correctly, and you correct me if I'm wrong, anybody out there correct me if I'm wrong, I think this trailer just basically dropped out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like, I don't remember them announcing this at all.
No, I don't think there was an announcement, but you knew it had to be coming soon because, the show was getting ready to start. So they got to pub it, number one. But then the other thing too, I remember didn't we see like a teaser or something like this before?
Well, there was another trailer that they had. It was, and that's the reason why I think that this thing dropped out of nowhere. And again, we are going to get to the trailer in a second, but as what we usually like to do is try to give everybody a few minutes to actually get on the thing and, everybody, give you a chance to join us and everything else. But yeah, they had the one trailer that was out that was actually really cool, and it showed you pretty much what this show was going to be like. Somewhat of the darkness, the grittiness, pretty much the continuation of Rogue One. But they left it at that, and then originally the show was supposed to debut at the end of August, and now it's been moved to the end of September. I think it's September 23rd. So, still though, it's definitely time for them to actually drop this thing. And then, of course, Ronaldo said, yeah, no one expected it. And that was the thing. I remember last week, we were all set to go on, and I remember that day I saw Andor trailer 2, and I'm like, what is he talking about? And then I realized, especially when it was on the official Star Wars site, that, yeah, this thing is pretty much coming out. I'm like, of course it is, because we were all set to go with this other show, which, of course, and you guys can, go back and check it out, we did end up doing the leaked Season 3 trailer of The Mandalorian simply because we had put it off for so long, and I didn't want to put it off anymore, and I figure, okay, the trailer's still new enough, that we could certainly deal with it. But from everything that, I've been able to gather from this thing, it's definitely going to give us a little bit more into what this show is going to be about. And, Ronaldo was kind of like, yeah, it feels great to wake up with the surprise of a new Star Wars trailer. And if I remember, Obi-Wan did that too, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, no, they actually did something at
Yeah, but it was almost the same type of deal where they had showed the first trailer or whatever at some, I don't know, maybe it was D20, something like that, right? One of their things that they do, whether it was a con or something like that. And then I remember I don't remember if it was one of the ones that we actually reacted to or whatever, but I remember that they they just dropped out of nowhere a trailer. And it was same type of deal. It was either a Monday or Friday show. And I mean, woke up and it's like, wow, a new Obi-Wan trailer. So they're not exactly above doing this, where you don't hear anything for months on these shows. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they drop some trailer. It's not like some 30-second thing either. I mean, it's a full-blown, full-length
2.5-minute trailer.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was kind of cool because, like you basically said, it's getting to be about that time. I mean, even though they've moved the premiere date on this thing, it's still a month and a half away. I mean, we're pretty much coming up on this thing, and it's time to start promoting it and get people into it, primarily because it's going to be different. And I will say this, just from what I've heard of the trailer and the few bits I've seen, the couple of things that I could say before we even get into reacting to the real trailer is, I like the fact that it looks like they've gone to practical locations. They're not shooting on the, what's that thing called? The volume, yeah. They're not shooting on that. And it looks, and maybe it's a result of this, I don't know. But from the couple of scenes I've seen, it looks more cinematic to me than the other Star Wars shows. And then, of course, Ronaldo chimes in and he says, it looks very political. And that's something that I think that they were purposely going for, because you had Andor, who was once a separatist, who, when the Empire started rising, ended up joining the rebellion. And I remember when they were first talking about this show and we were going back and forth on it, one of the observations that you and I made, actually, was the fact that it's basically like Andor is still fighting the same organization. They were the Republic, and he was a separatist. And then when they turned into the Empire, he became a rebel.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I thought that
was
was
changed, yeah.
Yeah. And so it stands to reason that it's going to get into some of the politics of this thing, because it has to show how Andor came to be a part of the rebellion, a little bit of his background. Of course, Rogue One had a lot of political overtones in it as well, because it was kind of a gritty war film. And, it was just really cool. And then, of course, Ronaldo says, yeah, they actually are on location, and I love it. And, yeah, that's fantastic. So I think now what we could do is maybe, roll this trailer so we can actually see, like, look, we've officially seen this thing. So let's check it out. Yeah, these are definitely real locations. Yeah, see, this is the kind of stuff I really like to see.
Sweet.
To steal from the Empire?
Yeah, and the music in this is really cool,
Just
too.
walk in like you belong. They're so proud of themselves.
Oh, we get to see the Senate pods again.
So fat and satisfied. They can't imagine that someone like me would ever get inside their house.
Oh, so we get a little bit of an undercover vibe going here.
So slowly. We're starting not to notice. What I'm asking is this.
I'm also trying to talk here to avoid copyright strikes.
To something real.
Okay, so it's September 21st, not 23rd.
I need all the heroes I can get.
For the greater good.
Well, 2 tubes.
2 tubes and,
What you will.
Let's call it.
Saw Gerrera's back. All right, so that's cool. They got something going here.
There's fermenting out there, son. Pockets of fermenting.
Yeah, see, this looks more like a Star Wars film than a TV show.
Fish. Or are you a thief?
You're slipping.
I'm not slipping. I've just been hiding for too long.
I'm trying to see if I recognize who some of these main characters are in the Star Wars lore.
Thinks I'm an irritation. There's a good chance they'll miss what I'm really doing.
What are you really doing?
So that's Mon Mothma, I think, right?
This is what revolution looks like.
I'm trying to find the AK-47 that everybody was complaining about in this trailer.
I thought that was Maz.
I think it might be. I think people were actually saying that was Maz. All right.
And it's
All
3
right.
episodes that premiere.
Yeah, 3 episodes. And that was something that I was hearing too, is that they were going to actually premiere 3 episodes of this, which makes sense because it's a little bit like, okay, so for Obi-Wan, they basically showed us 2, and we used to make the joke all the time that it's like a third of the season is actually going to be on the first night. Well, it turns out that's what we're getting with Andor 2, is a fourth of the season. Because I think it's a 12-episode season, if I remember correctly.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
they're going to, from there, it's just going to be like, okay, so we're going to get the first 3 episodes. So it makes me wonder, with this thing being a 12-episode show, how long, and if you guys know the answer to this, chime in. I mean, whether you're watching live in the comments, whatever, let us know exactly how long each of these episodes. Because that's always the big question for me with any of these shows. And I do know that they're going to be doing something to where I think like season 1 is covering a certain time period in his life or something. Like it's going to be handled a little bit differently than some of the other shows as well.
Yeah, I mean this show looks amazing just off rip. With the actual look of the show.
Yeah.
You could definitely tell they're in practical locations. The cinematography looks awesome. The vibe, just it has that whole gritty war vibe that we got from Rogue One. I really liked, just even the voiceover. It's like, okay, they would never thought that that somebody like me would enter their house. They're his views and opinions of this empire. It's like, oh, they've gotten so fat and lazy and full of themselves and arrogant, and they will never suspect that somebody like me would be here. And so that kind of, and that's what I always love, getting perspective of where these characters are. Because how the old well, not the old Republic, but the Republic before it changed into the Empire, I don't think they were like that. I mean, I think that's just the attitude of the Emperor has kind of filtered its way down into the people.
True, but see, and this is what's interesting to me is that, so that's the real perspective, right? But for Andor, and this is what makes me really curious about this show, more about the nuances of the show even than the show itself, and that is that you basically have Andor, who again started out as a separatist. So he, in his mind, what Palpatine turned this republic into, which of course is this evil empire, this is basically how Andor looked at it the whole time. And so in a way, I think when you hear lines like that, it's almost like he's basically, it's almost like he was proven right. Like, see, I try to tell everybody. Everybody thought that this is some benevolent, hey, we're your friends, and they're really out to destroy and in some ways assimilate everything into this republic. And if he did think that there was a difference, he might have thought, well, maybe the republic was trying to hide its true intentions, and now it just doesn't care. It has the power, so whatever. So I think when you do get these lines like, yeah, I'm in their house, like, what was the line exactly?
Oh,
they never thought I would.
They wouldn't have thought somebody like me would enter their house.
Yeah, would enter their house. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think is really cool, because someone like him, he's probably referring to the fact that he's a separatist, and he was basically like kind of the enemy. And what I liked about that is that, again, it shows how this thing has always been like a political thriller type of a thing, which is something that you and I sort of wanted from a show, especially like this, right? Was that there's a little bit of an intrigue, a little bit of that whole Ocean's 11, Mission Impossible, those kind of movies. Almost like, I mean, even though in some cases, like Ocean's 11, The Italian Job, stuff like that, they're kind of like heist films. Even the old Robert Redford movie Sneakers, which is still hands down one of my favorite movies, where you get some of these things that are kind of like these heist film type of things. There's a couple of Jason Statham films that are like that. But the point is, it's the vibe of those movies and the way that they're done that adds a lot of suspense and intrigue to it. And I love the fact that it looks like that this show is going to be shot pretty much like that. And to that end, Ronaldo says, I think there was a reason to premiere with 3 episodes. I think it was important for the story that they're telling. And certainly weigh in on this, but from my perspective, to me, I think that that's just a trend that they're starting to follow. They did that with Obi-Wan. I think it's what they're doing is they're trying to give you, in Obi-Wan's case, it was a third of the season. In this case, it's a fourth of the season. I don't know if it's necessarily tied to the specific story they're trying to tell as much as it is they're trying to give you a chunk of this thing to hook you in and to get you interested.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that, that they are really just trying to give you enough of the story to really like, okay, now you want more. I don't know how long each episode is supposed to be. I don't know if it's a half hour or 45-minute episode. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a big mystery.
I'm assuming it's probably the former. Just because
what, a half hour?
Yeah.
Really?
I think it's probably going to be because you got the 3 episodes that you're dropping on one time. So I don't think they would drop 3 hours on one show.
But think about it though. I don't necessarily disagree. Let me just start by saying that. I'm not, you're probably right on that, but you also have to remember that one of the advantages of this whole streaming thing versus showing shows in the traditional way that they used to have to do on television, right? Where they book a night for it. And even then, they would show these miniseries and stuff like that. But they could drop a show that maybe has 3 hours of content at once simply because it's streaming. You can watch it at your own pace. And so because again, you have to look at it like this. So each Obi-Wan episode was roughly an hour. There were some that were a little less, some that were a little more, but they pretty much worked out to be an hour. And it was 6 episodes only. And they dropped 2 episodes of that thing, which is basically 2 hours. 2 hours of a 6-hour thing. So if you just want to say maybe, let's just say that Andor is the same thing, it's an hour. Well, now you have a 12-hour thing. And if you're telling a story over that big chunk of time, doing 3 hours of a 12-hour thing is somewhat the same. Not quite, because it's not quite. It would actually be 4 hours. If they wanted to do it exactly how Obi-Wan did it, they would have done 4 one-hour episodes at one time.
Yeah, I kind of see what you're saying. It just seems like that would be a lot to have somebody try to consume. Because,
but think about it like this, though. Well, but they drop entire shows like Cobra Kai and stuff like that, which actually turns out to be like 5.5 hours.
Well, yeah, but you can. I get it, but they dropped the whole season. They really don't necessarily expect you to really watch it all
right at one time, in one sitting.
One time. You can. Of course, people binge watch shows like that all the time.
Sure, which is why I say 3 hours is really nothing. If you stop and think in terms of the average movie now is about 2.5 hours, and people will watch a single film, whether it's in the theater or on streaming. If you were to watch Titanic, that would be 3.5 hours. And so as long as it's good, I could see him doing it. My thing is, it could be an hour long each. But where I would say that it might not be is only because if it's 12 episodes Do we really expect? I mean, it could be because of what they're covering, right? They're trying to cover this one specific time period of Andor's life, which I wish I can remember. We should look that up at some point. But the way they're doing it, it's almost like a thing to where they're covering this certain period of time of Andor's life, and then season 2 will be another section, and I almost want to say it's like 24 in that way. But again, to me, like 12 one-hour episodes, I mean, that's a lot. I mean, depending on how much they're trying to cover, that's a lot. So I might be inclined to agree with you that they're probably more the 30 to 40 minute range, maybe. And who knows? They might even be they might pull a Mandalorian on us, and each episode's like 20 minutes.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, too. I mean, it could be. I think we also like a mixture of that because a lot of shit. So sometimes you have, let's say, a couple episodes, 30 minutes, maybe 45. The next one, 27. You sometimes you start getting all these. And I think because you don't have the advent of commercials, that's the thing. You don't. It's streaming, so you don't have to adhere to a certain thing because that's the thing that we're factoring out is the commercials anymore.
Well,
So
not yes and no. I mean, when I say an hour, I'm not talking because first of all, an hour of broadcast television, if it's a 1 hour show, then it's basically 40 minutes. It's
right,
like
but what I'm saying, right? But I mean, you always can count that if it's an hour show, it's always going to be 40 minutes. That's what
right,
I'm
but I'm not,
saying.
and I've never
Whereas here, this could be 50 minutes one episode, 40 minutes another, 27. You know what I mean?
right, and that's why I'm just
That's
saying
what I'm
it like
saying.
an average. I mean, I'm not saying that every episode's going to be exactly 1 hour. I was just saying it's like Obi-Wan. One could be 55, one could be an hour and 5, but when you average it out, it turned out to be that way. Just like you can average out most of the Mandalorian episodes, and they average out to be maybe like 25, 30 minutes because it might have been the first season. I remember one was like 17 minutes. And I'm like, what's the point? I mean, trailers are like 3, it's so, but then they also had some Mandalorian episodes in that same season that were like 50. So that one's a little bit harder to average out, I think. This is kind of interesting though. Ronaldo says, I found a review of someone that already saw part of it. I think the first 4 episodes, let me find it. He goes on to say, it's the most serious, grounded thing Star Wars has ever done. Unsurprising. It feels like an English-made espionage thriller than Star Wars. Also a vibe that I get from the trailer. It's totally unconcerned with giving you fan service moments. Well, thank goodness. And then it actually humanizes roles that are traditionally cartoon evil in the Star Wars universe and attempts to tell a grown-up story. I think a lot of fans are going to hate it. And he says, that's the review. Sounds good to me. And yeah, I honestly think that this could be the show. And you and I may have, I'm not going to say we did, but we may have made this observation years ago when they first pretty much brought this up. And that is, this could be the show that actually brings new fans to the franchise. And I'm not talking about new fans as in they were once movie only or something like that, and now they're going to dip their toe in the television waters. I mean, like, brand new fans.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, with Andor and even Rogue One, that was the cool thing. That was the cool thing about Rogue One was that it felt like a war movie.
Yep.
It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was like war that was set in the Star Wars universe. And this seems like it's continuing that whole vibe of let's put and we all know war, a big part of war is politics. Like wars don't exist without it. So I think that's what we're going to get. We're going to get a combination of the two. What we always talk about political thrillers. I mean, it gives me Last Survivor, 24, that kind of gritty thrillers, suspense, political vibe. with war action, with war kind of weaved in between um the politics.
Well, that's like a
And I
perfect
think,
description. That's
you
perfect
know,
because that's exactly. And I was thinking that along those same lines too. Is that it very much marries two subgenres together, which is a political thriller and a war movie, and it kind of
mhm.
weaves it in. And really, Rogue One kind of did that too. But I think that this is going to be, like you said, it's going to be expanded a little bit. It's going to be along the lines of a 24 or even some of the what was what's the one with Kiefer Sutherland playing the vice president that ended up getting elevated to something
That was
Survivor, right?
yeah, the last Survivor.
Was it The Last Survivor? I could have sworn it was something else. Well, either way, that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's those kind of things, and then also it's going to give us what we loved about Rogue One, and one of the things, and you brought this up, is the fact that you have a movie in Rogue One I'm talking about that it's really more on the genre than it is Star Wars, right? It's not a Star Wars film with romantic overtones or undertones of this or whatever. It doesn't have elements of something. I mean, it literally is this type of a film, but set in the Star Wars universe. But it doesn't emphasize the Star Wars universe. It just takes place in it.
Right, exactly. And this is what I was trying to. I was trying to figure out the name of the film. It reminds me of Rules of Engagement with a little bit of like James Bond
Oh,
or
there you go.
one of the or the Born Identities type stuff.
Yep.
That's what it kind of reminds me of. Like if you put those two together and there's your baby, and just put it in like a Star Wars bassinet. They
Like
there
one of
you
those
go.
little baby Yoda things or something.
Yep.
I mean, this is why I always say I really think. Look, everybody says this before every Star Wars series. It's almost like you ask any music artist before they drop a new album, they're all going to say the same thing. Oh, this is the best album we've ever written, and and of course it is. I mean, because what are you really going to say? Are you really as an artist going to be like, well, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's good, but a couple albums ago that was really the masterpiece. This one's almost like that, but not quite. It's okay. Go out and buy it, right? No, it's always,
Right.
and sometimes it's not a marketing thing. A lot of times when you write something or create something new, to you, that's the best thing because that's representing you right now. And subjectively, or I should say objectively, you can go back and say, well, I know what you're thinking, man, but it really doesn't really beat 3 albums ago or something. But
Yeah.
it's the same thing with this. Every Star Wars series that comes out, all of us Star Wars fans are like, yes, this is the one. This is the one that's going to knock it out of the park. Now, don't get me wrong. I think pretty much all the series that have come out so far have managed to get above the, okay, it's good baseline, right? Like they all have a base quality to them. Some of them, though, fall a little bit, like with the Book of Boba Fett. I think the problem with that show is it just fell below expectations and they mishandled the character in certain aspects. And I think that's what maybe soured some people to that show. The Mandalorian, though, which is the very first one that we had, the very first live-action Star Wars that we had, I mean, they got that one completely right. It was great. Everybody loves it. In fact, it's been, a lot of people have started saying after that, hey, the future of Star Wars is on television. Look, the show that saves Star Wars, But I think when you just compare the actual shows, though, and you leave the rest of the franchise out, and you're just looking at it from a couple of perspectives. Good television, first and foremost. And then secondly, maybe how it compares to these other Star Wars shows. I think this one is going to be that one. I don't think it's misplaced optimism to actually say, hey, I think this one's going to be that show that really brings, first of all, I think it's going to solidify the love of Star Wars for the fans. Maybe it'll put a little bit of fire extinguishing foam on the toxicity of the fan base. But secondly, I think it's honestly going to bring in some new people that might not otherwise have watched Star Wars. I think they're going to say, you know what? This is going to be that show. Because like you said, it's set in the Star Wars universe, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be. It just happens to be.
Right. I think that's the biggest thing. So a lot of people, from what I've heard, like, there's people who, we've talked about this before, the lore versus the war. And a lot of people don't really get with the whole Force and, Jedi and Sith thing. Like, that's, to them, it's silly, or it's, it's just not their bag, but this, though, because it's so grounded in reality, and you're dealing with, like you said, the Star Wars universe, yet you don't have, people picking up things with their mind and throwing them, and swords that light up, and, and I'm just saying this facetiously, but, that's what takes people out of the film, where this is actually going to, like you said, it could bring a lot of people into it, because people like, gritty stuff. People like things that are like, okay, well, dang, I wonder what's going to happen. They like that thriller suspense thing. And so, like we talked about, years ago, about when Star Wars should start getting into subgenres, when we start saying, like, okay, why not have a Star Wars horror film that's, all right, this is what a horror film would look like in a Star Wars universe.
Exactly.
Or what a political thriller, like I said, I could totally see Bloodline being in this.
Yes.
I could totally see a lot of different things. So I think there's going to be a time where you're going to have almost two cultures in Star Wars. We possibly could have something where, like, people care more about the war, the political, that aspect of Star Wars, and then you're going to have folks who really love the lore, the mystic, Jedi, Sith, that type of stuff. And then you're going to have people probably like us who love both, and it's just like, okay, we consume it all. There's no difference for us.
And to that end, definitely, I think, and you mentioned us pretty much being like the balance, right? We love both of them pretty much equally. I think what you're going to find is a show like this could end up being a gateway to people that might not otherwise have been interested. But once they live in this universe for a while and you start exposing them to the lore, they see that it's not really silly. Because I think one of the reasons why Star Wars, from the time it first came out, appealed to so many people and so many generations for a long time. I mean, arguably, until Disney came along, and depending on which side on this you land, either messed it up or, took it in a slightly different direction. But in a lot of cases, and maybe you can even argue before the prequels without question, but I'll even include the prequels in this, that Star Wars pretty much appealed to a wide variety of people because it had a lot of elements to it where it didn't live completely in just fantasy sci-fi. There were a lot of themes and everything that appealed to people who are non-fantasy and sci-fi fans. And so a lot of times you would find people that would actually say things like, I'm not really into science fiction, I'm not really into fantasy films, but I do love Star Wars though. That's like their exception. And especially when you look at the original trilogy, it really is kind of what we're talking about here. It's a very classic storytelling thing, the hero's journey, something that is in all kinds of stories because it's a classic trope. But yet it just happens to be set in a sci-fi fantasy realm. And so I think that that's the reason why a lot of people really love that. And I think Andor is going to continue and probably further that tradition. Because like you said, you have a situation where it just is this really cool political thriller / war movie that just happens to take place in the Star Wars universe. But you could easily pluck it out of that universe and put it into our current one, and it would feel just as at home. And I think that that is a very important thing that's definitely needed. Let me just get to this one comment that Ronaldo made here. He says, Star Wars has always had silly elements since the originals and annoying characters at some level. But Rogue One was the first one to ignore that stuff and tell a more grown-up story. And he thinks that Andor will do the same. And that's pretty much what you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of people, like I said, a lot of people will land. And that's the thing. A lot of people say, man, I want to get with Star Wars. I mean, it's this pop culture, like icon titan type of franchise, but I just can't see why people like it so much, and that's so I think this is kind of, and I think it's because they don't get the whole story, and it's, to them it's goofy. And then and because now you have things that jump all over the timeline now, people are kind of like, okay, I don't even want to deal with this. But if you create something that has more of a, like I said, the grown up, grounded reality, okay, I can follow this. There's not some mystic thing out here that's, I always sound like Han Solo. I mean, that was the cool thing about Han. It's like, even the way he was when, we meet him in A New Hope. And he was talking to Obi-Wan. He was like, yeah, there's not some weird mystic thing that's, controlling my destiny. He kind of was like laughing at the whole concept of the movie that he's in, really.
Well, here's the thing. Well, this is good. I actually want to go with that for a second, because I was going to answer a couple other points that you had, which maybe I will. Maybe I'll get those out of the way first. A lot of it is you also have this other type of person who it's almost like a badge of honor not to watch Star Wars. They're all over social media. You'll see this every once in a while. These guys, they'll even post, and of course they're trolling at that point, but they'll post in the Star Wars groups. Look, everybody knows a person. Everybody's had a friend. This even predates social media. Everybody's had that friend who triumphantly and, emphatically says, I've never seen a Star Wars film. It's almost like this thing, like they purposely avoid it because they want to be different. It's one of those deals. And then of course you have the other people which you were talking about, who they can't even really get to the contents because they can't get past the packaging. And that's really what it comes down to on that. But now, what you just brought up was something that I really want to explore just a little bit here, because I think that was part of Lucas's genius. What he did was, the part of the audience that would actually say, hey, this is kind of stupid, they actually put a character that represents you. Han Solo is pretty much the gateway character for all the people that think that this kind of stuff is stupid. And he narrates that. And I think, and I don't know if we brought this up, because when we started the show, it was actually right when The Last Jedi came out. And I don't ever remember us doing a Force Awakens review. So, but of course we talked about it a million times, right? And one of the things that I remember that we said was one of the beautiful parts of that movie, actually, was Han Solo's journey, and he goes from being this skeptic to, yeah, exactly, kind of like, yeah, it's all true, man. Like every bit of it. I've seen some things. And what was really funny too is even to hear him talking about it was really odd, because he's a character that sort of, okay, yeah, you got this whole thing, I'm doing something else. But when you would talk about Vader or the Emperor or Snoke and all this stuff, because you got to feel for the guy. Here's a guy who didn't believe in any of this stuff and thought it was all stupid. And then he's kind of like, all right, it's kind of real, but he doesn't really have an interest in it. Well, now he's right in the middle of it. I mean, his wife is Vader's daughter. Then he has his son, who's basically a Jedi, who essentially turns to the dark side. And it's kind of like, you talk about difficult parenting. I mean, parenting's difficult anyway. You're always afraid, like, okay, is my kid going to be the next Mozart or the next Ted Bundy or Charles Manson? It's kind of like you just don't know. You do your best. How many times have you known really cool people right? They raise a kid and their kid's in jail and all this stuff. And you want to say, well, what was the parenting like? But a lot of times the parenting was good. The kid just, didn't listen, rebelled, made bad choices. And so as a parent, you're like, great, I have no idea how to deal with this. And here's Han Solo in the middle of this completely vast mystical world that's really going on around him, which is something that I loved in Solo, a Star Wars story, because you kind of look at, he's dealing more with the realities of life, not realizing that this stuff that, he thinks is hokey and all that stuff, as he put it in episode 4, is really affecting his life and everybody else's life. Because you got 2 Sith Lords who are in charge of the whole thing, right? Then you have like the light side opposed. It's almost like there's this underground war thing going on behind the scenes. And so to see his journey and his transformation was great. But as a character, though, we're basically brought in with a character who pretty much feels the same way a lot of the audience would. And this is where I think Andor comes in.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you look at, that's why you create characters, because, these characters that you create should connect to some people. And you and I have done we've done the show before where we said, all right, who's your favorite character? Han Solo being yours, right? But if you really stop and think about it, though, look at the characters and pretty much like what they represent. Han Solo is the practical guy, man's man. He's just doing this thing. He's cool. He's got that swagger, but he's kind of like the rebel, like kind of the outlaw, like, yeah, whatever. Like
James
the cool
Dean
kid
type
that's a
character,
rebel.
yeah.
Exactly. Right. It's like the Fonz or something. And then, you got Luke, who's like this idealistic, like, well, we can change the world. Why can't we, he's almost like the Michael Jackson or something. Like, why can't we make it a world a better place for you and me? And why can't we, because even when he's like, I don't believe it, and Luke is like, well, I believe, it's just kind of like he's that dreamy-eyed kid who's just like the world is his oyster, and he's just, I'm going to find a way to do the impossible, right? And then you got Leia, who's like that strong, independent, driven, but she also has the femininity to her. Like, she's not tomboyish or anything, but she's strong in her femininity as well. Where she can stand in a room with all the big boys and hold her own, but at the same time, she's still not afraid to be a woman. And so when you look at those 3 characters, and of course there's more to come, because then you kind of have Yoda, who's kind of like the old shaman wise man, who's like the grandfather of everybody, who's seen the world from all different perspectives. And he's kind of like has all this mountains of wisdom. Obi-Wan is kind of like the dad, who's kind of like, all right, I kind of have to get my kid prepared for the world, but I can't tell him everything because he's not ready, but I kind of have to get him started here. And yeah, I might make some mistakes and I have to share those, but it's a process. So when you look at all these different characters, like, they identify with some people, so young and old. So like the young kids who are wild out and bushy tail, who want to go out and conquer the world and be the hero, and I want to be a firefighter or a police officer because they think it's cool to save the world. And okay, then you got people who want to be the cool kid like Han, and girls who want to be strong but still girly like Leia, and so everybody can find something in Star Wars. And like you said, I think that's what made the characters so cool. And that's why everybody can kind of somewhat relate to them. And so when we get to Andor, it's the same thing. Now you have some things where you could even take, and I like I said, it's got that political twist to it. So I think we're going to see people who are going to also feel like, all right, I bet the people never thought that they would, a person like me would be able to enter their house. There's people who really feel like that in politics. Like, they never thought that, this Latino person may be able to sit in this high seat or be in this place. And so, even though I don't think they're going to go to the extremes of pandering, but I think you're going to start to see, even in Andor, just okay, how people can relate to certain characters, and that's the whole thing about Star Wars is relatability.
Well, before I get to some of Ronaldo's chats, I'm not entirely sure that Andor's going to be as character-driven as some of these other films. Now, certainly you can make the argument, and here's, this may be an oversimplification in some respects, but generally speaking, you have movies or TV shows that are story-driven versus character-driven. A character-driven show or film will generally, and there are exceptions, of course, but if you're looking for a simplification, breaking it down to its elemental level here, a character-driven film or a character-driven television show will generally have a simpler story because that allows you time to get into a lot of the characters. And if you look at A New Hope, it's a very simple story, but it's a character-driven thing. In fact, I would argue really that the original trilogy is very much character-driven. A story-driven, and this is where a lot of your political thrillers and stuff like this generally fall, the story is what you're really focused on, and the characters are a little simpler. They're not as, you have certain character types and everything else, but the focus, and again, I'm not saying that a story-driven show or film or whatever has just like really basic characters, anything like that. Not at all. In fact, some of them could be quite complex. The difference is it's where the focus lies. The focus is on the story in a story-driven thing versus the focus being more on the characters when you're talking about something character-driven, which of course is implied in the type. And I think that Andor, honestly, is going to be, in a sense, story-driven because that's what's giving it its motion and all that other stuff. But I do think, though, it is going to focus quite a bit on characters. And I think it's just going to mirror Rogue One in that regard. Because if you look at Rogue One, there was some very different characters. And I didn't spend a whole lot of time on them. Because, again, Rogue One, I would argue, is a little bit more story-driven. But
yeah, I would say that too.
Even though, again, that almost, because Rogue One has a fairly, I wouldn't call it a simple story. I would call it more straightforward. But, they basically introduced you to these characters. But I think that the difference is, if you want to add a little complexity to this explanation, in a character-driven, basically it's how the story fits into the characters. And a story-driven thing is how the characters fit into the story. That's because, again... Do you think we can get a half and half? Well, I mean, I would say that... Depends on what you say. I mean, I think story versus character is almost like in politics, right versus left, right? If you even go an inch one way or the other, it's gonna lean that way. See, I mean, unless you're like really dead in the center, which I suppose you could have that. You could have a film or something, or because Andor is a television show, we'll just deal with television right now. You can probably have one that walks that line where it's somewhat equally focused on both. It would be tough, though, because I think that, you can go like an inch either way, and boom, that's going to swing it. But, and here's another thing, and this just popped into my head, obviously, is that maybe it goes by season. Maybe season 1's more story-driven. Maybe season 2 is more character-driven. They could do it that way, too. Or episode to episode.
Well, I think we're gonna get a lot of different because it's episodic, so now we have time to flesh some things out. Unlike Rogue One, like where you kind of, I mean, but even though we still got a lot in Rogue One, where we saw Jen, we saw what her motivation was, but we never knew, like, okay, unless you read the book, which is why you always said read the book Catalyst, because that gave you the whole Galen Erso, information, his relationship with Krennic. Like most, you didn't get that in the film.
Mm-mm.
You didn't get that they were actually friends and they were cool. It just seemed like Krennic was just like this evil guy and he just went after Galen Erso. But it's like, really, if you really read you found out about the story, they were actually like really good friends. And so, and how he was trying to convince his friend to, like, look, man, you have the opportunity to do something really major with your work. Come work for the, so you didn't get that in Rogue One.
Right.
And so I think that in something like this, though, you would get something like a Catalyst, but it's in the TV form. And I think because now we're going to see the different conversations that maybe you'll see with Mon Mothma, like how she's putting together the whole rebellion, how she's quietly trying to do certain things, while these other things are going on. So that's why I was asking you, do you think you can get a little bit of both in there? But
well, probably. But here's the thing, and I'm so glad that you said it this way, because it opens the door for me to make that Star Trek reference I have to make in every show. Or one of us does. It's not truly episodic. You have to be very careful when you really use that term, because episodic television, it's not episodic just because there's episodes.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
An episodic television show, much like the original Star Trek shows, and this is one of the things that Strange New Worlds, one of its biggest marketing points was, we're getting back to episodic television. Simply means that the story is wrapped up at the end of the episode. So every episode is kind of a different thing, right? Like and someone, they actually sort of walk that line, like Frasier. You and I love that show, and it's basically an episodic show, but there are themes that go across. So it's like, as you're watching from season to season, you see how everything's connected. But I'll never forget especially when I was first showing it to you, and there's certain episodes where you watch where some big thing would be happening, either in the episode or especially at the end of the episode. And then you watch the next episode, and it's almost as if it didn't happen. Now, as the season progresses, they might reference certain things, and you go, oh, okay, that's how it's affecting that person. But from episode to episode, it's some like big thing, and you're just like, whoa, it's almost like it didn't happen. Whereas a lot of things like Star Trek Discovery and things, and 24 really is one of the ones that kicked this off, where in all the Star Wars shows thus far, it's almost like you're taking one big story and you're just dividing it up into chunks. Which I think it would be like serial television or something is what they call it. I forgot, but
that's right. You're absolutely right. It is serial television.
And that's really what they lean more towards against. But I think that that's going to be the case here. But again, if they ever did a Star Wars show that was truly episodic, which they could do. See, Star Trek can do it because that's where it began. But you could say there's some of the same vastness, and that's where they're similar, is that the Star Trek universe is pretty vast as well. And yet they managed to do episodic television and that. So, but I think that if you were to do that in the Star Wars realm, you would have to set it up that way. You could do The Mandalorian that way. They haven't been, but you could do it. You could, because, and that's really what you and I, at least, and I think a lot of people thought that's what it was going to be. Because it's like, oh, it's a lone gunslinger type of Western thing. And it was, I think somebody had compared it to Kung Fu or something, where it's kind of like this guy's going and sort of exploring and getting into some things. And you might have some recurring themes or story arcs or something like that. But I mean, pretty much they were going to wrap everything up at the end of the episode. And I mean, they kind of do. But I mean, it's not as serial as, say, like an Obi-Wan or something like that, or or even Book of Boba
Right.
Fett. Let's get to some of these chats. So this is a big question that Ronaldo brings up. He says, "Do you think fans will get mad if there's no Jedi or Sith?"
No, just because look at Rogue One.
Yeah,
Rogue One had
yeah.
none of that, and it was actually one of the better Star Wars films that have been released.
Yeah, and I don't, for the record, for me anyway, I don't think that the lack of Jedi or Sith is what made it a better Star Wars film.
True.
It's really more that I think one of the things that did affect it, that made it better though, is because you eliminate the Jedi or Sith. I mean, they did have that one casual mention of the Force. And, I mean, let's face it, you did had Vader, right? I mean, Vader did. I mean, to say that Rogue One had no Jedi or Sith is really not entirely accurate.
Which part?
Little Independence Day reference. Because it did, and Vader's using the Force in the thing. But where that point, I think, is the strongest is you don't have the reliance on the Jedi or Sith to carry the story. And because you don't have these key characters that permeate the entire Star Wars universe, I think what ends up happening is it forces you, no pun intended, to tell a better story because you don't have those things to rely on. And so from that standpoint, it becomes more accurate to say there's no Jedi or Sith. It's really the reliance isn't on it. Even though Chirrut is kind of like sort of like a stand-in for a Jedi in a sense. Although he doesn't really do anything but mutter that he's with the Force and the Force is with him. But, yeah, I don't think so. And then he says, for the look of it, it doesn't seem to be any Jedi in this, but maybe when we see the show, there's a Jedi and it totally makes sense in the context or show, or not. It's very indecisive. You're like, oh, maybe not. And then, of course, he goes on to say, but I hope that they don't put Jedi just to please people. If there's going to be a Jedi, let it make sense if the story needs it.
So this makes me beg the question: do you think we'll see Vader? And I'm not saying in a typical, he's
Vader-y
coming in with the
sense.
lightsaber,
Right?
Yeah, Vader-y sense. But I mean, just because people forget that he was once a general, like he was General Skywalker, so he's used to doing. I mean, granted, most of the military stuff is kind of left up to Tarkin and all them, all those guys. But maybe there could be a scene where Vader may have to insert. You're like, okay, you know what, you guys aren't getting it done. Do it this way. Do you think we'll see any of that?
I don't know. I don't think that we're going to see Vader because I think that what they're trying to do with this, see, with Rogue One, because a lot of people thought, oh, they put Vader in there, they put Tarkin in there. They didn't really have to, but they put him in there because they needed to guarantee box office numbers. Where I'm not necessarily opposing that point of view. I'm sure that they're, the marketing department is not going to say no to putting Vader and Tarkin in the thing. However, I would argue that for Rogue One, because it's sort of an addendum to the Skywalker saga, really. And it's talking about the Death Star plans and everything, and Vader and Tarkin are very much tied to that. That makes sense to put them in. The story with Andor, I mean, I would say that you could put Vader or Tarkin or somebody in there if it directly relates to them in some cases, because like you said, I mean, these guys are at the top. I mean,
well, yeah, because the reason why I say that is because I'm thinking of timeline, right? So when you look at the timeline, like when we get to Rogue One, because from what I've heard, it makes sense, that Andor bumps up right up against the beginning of Rogue One. All right. Well, in A New Hope, Vader and Tarkin are having that conversation. It's like, well, the last remnants of the Imperial Senate have been swept away. Leia knows who Vader is. So it just stands to reason that, because it has such political overtones, maybe we might see Vader, speaking, or maybe Tarkin may have to speak on behalf of, the Republic, I mean, the Empire, and Vader is there just kind of being Vader, but it's just kind of like, okay, as his enforcement, or as in, something to that effect. And so I'm wondering if we're going to see anything like that.
Well, given the fact that, but you also have to remember though that the Empire is pretty vast, and you'll have some
True.
corners of the world where Vader, it's almost like Vader can't be everywhere. These guys
True.
are at the top running the big stuff, and that's why I say in Rogue One it makes sense, because look, you're talking about the Death Star plans. That's a really sensitive thing. You're going to get Vader involved in that. You're talking about some of these other things. I'm infiltrating the general, Empire thing, and there's some stories going on and all that stuff. Maybe you're attacking outposts and things like that. They're talking about the Senate. I mean, honestly, I would argue that you would have a greater chance seeing the Emperor in it than you would Vader. Simply because, like you said, you see a lot of these Senate scenes, and because I was really happy to see, and we're going to roll the trailer again, by the way, but you see the Senate pods and everything, which, I mean, I like it because there is some fans. I mean, to say there's no fan service is not entirely true, but not all fan service is bad. Fan service just means that you're tying together elements of your franchise, and you're giving the fans elements of familiar scenes or familiar characters or whatever. The fan service that's bad is when you start shoehorning characters in. Like, because R2-D2 and C-3PO have been in every single Star Wars thing, it's almost like, oh, you gotta somehow shoehorn an appearance just to keep that going. Like they basically did that with Rogue One, honestly. I didn't care because it was nice to see, and it wasn't like, it didn't really take anything away from the story by doing it. And it made sense from a certain perspective because they were there during that time period and during that scene. So, let's see what else we got, because he's got a lot of chats. Basically, he says Rogue One is basically the Suicide Squad, and that's true to a degree. I mean, you could say that Rogue One is Ocean's 11. You could say Rogue One is the Italian Job. It's basically one of those things where you bring together a motley assortment of characters who otherwise may not have necessarily worked together, and then they're made to work together. Because that's a good way to bring out stories.
I hope we get to see and get more of Saw Gerrera, because he's a key player in all of this, and we didn't get a whole lot from him, of course, in Rogue One. So I'm hoping to see him having a bigger involvement in Andor.
Well, I think he will, because remember with the Rogue One thing, because obviously for anybody that's watching that doesn't either know or may not remember, Saw Gerrera was a Clone Wars series character invention. And he was actually quite a popular character in that show, and he popped up in a really significant number of episodes, actually. And so he was really one of the early architects of the rebellion. He was the guy that was sort of the first one, because he was even kind of rebelling against the Republic,
wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He was in a few books too. So he was one of those guys that I think with Rogue One, they brought him into live action because it really made sense, again, for that time period. And what I thought was really cool was they're showing his demise. Because one of the reasons why I thought that was a stroke of genius is, and again, this is where you get a lot of retconning that you have to do based on when the original trilogy was made and technology, and the fact that, George Lucas did not think of every single character that would ever appear in this thing. So you have to go, okay, you got somebody like Saw Gerrera. he can't be alive during the original trilogy because he would have been one of the main people doing it. So you have to do one of two things. He either has to be off taking care of his sick mother on Tatooine or something, and that's why he sat it out, or he has to be dead. Or, something radical, like he left the movement or something, or joined the Empire. I don't know. But the point is, somebody that big, you gotta explain, hey, how come we don't see him in the original trilogy? So they did the stroke of genius thing by killing him off in Rogue One. And doing it in a really cool way. So and of course, we know that, I'm trying to remember, who was the one that, was it Mothma? Who was the one that initially brought up talking to Saw Gerrera? Was it Jin? Was it Andor? Was it Mothma? It was one of them that was like, oh, we'll just go to Saw Gerrera. Or so. Oh, it was because they knew about Jin's connection to him. And they knew that in order to bring him out of hiding or something, that she was the only one that can basically smoke him out.
Yeah.
But I want to say it was Andor that suggested that, though.
No, because this is before they even met him. In Rogue One, this is before. This is when Jin was in captivity, and they I want to say, yeah, it was
because
Jen was held up. She got arrested, and then I think
that was in the beginning. It was basically like it was because, but I think you're right. I think Andor actually was imprisoned with the pilot and Chirrut and who's the other guy?
Baze.
Yeah, Baze. And then they had to try to escape or something. That might have been what it was because they had a bargain for it or whatever. See, I need to watch Rogue One again. But the point being, though, that putting him in Andor is actually a really good idea because you start to see, because you're talking about, hey, this is how the Empire, or not the Empire, the rebellion is building. And we're finally seeing the architects of that, right? Because you had a little bit sprinkled in episode 3. You had some, Mothma, Bail type of thing. And Rogue One, of course. Same thing. Hey, reach out to your Jedi friend and all that stuff. You have all these little seeds being planted of the rebellion. But you don't actually see hey, let's roll up our sleeves and actually build this thing. It became,
how's this going to work?
Right, how's it going to work? Because the thing is that in Rogue One, that's when it solidified. Because it was really that mission over, oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot the name of the planet now. This is terrible.
Scarif?
Yes. It was basically that mission that unified everybody, and the rebellion became what we know of it. At least in its final form. I mean, it was it was building to that point, but it hadn't gotten to that point yet. And so I think that was one of the things that's really cool, right? That you basically in Andor, maybe we see a little bit more of how those pieces have been put together. Let's see. He says, I mean, what if Andor has absolutely 0% Jedi or Sith?
He's really
I know he really wants to.
I think once again, I think it'll be fine. I mean, like I said before, I think this is what some people want. I think they want to see a Star Wars film without the mystic stuff. I think they really want to see just a good story, and I think this is a perfect time for them to do it. I think this is a perfect time, and this is a perfect show for them to kind of do. I mean, look how, really. The first season, put it to you this way. The first season of The Mandalorian. I mean, yes, technically Baby Yoda was there and he had the Force and he did some stuff, but really that's not really what caught people. It was really like the whole Mandalorian thing, just the whole vibe of it, the whole gunslinger. It was kind of more of a reality type thing. You could kind of see it more being a real thing versus lightsaber battles and people using the Force left and right. I mean, that came later in season 2 when you bring in Ahsoka and Luke and
Well, and
all
that's
of that.
because
But for the most part,
right.
it's really just the reality of like, okay, you know what, we can do Star Wars without Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. It's possible.
Well, and Ronaldo at that point says, I don't think you need them to make a good story. And here's the point that I'll make based on that. First of all, I'm going to echo everything that you just said. But to add to that, pretty much you have to understand that the story doesn't call for that. I mean, with The Mandalorian, there's the undertones of the Jedi and the Sith because of the whole thing that, well, we find out that Gideon was really pulling the strings, but Werner Herzog's character, I keep forgetting that character's name for some reason. But his character, when he hired the Mandalorian, you don't really know what it's for. It's like, go out, find this asset. Because at first they called it the asset, right? Then you find out it's this child. And then, of course, they started calling it the child. And you find out that ultimately they're trying to get the midi-chlorians out of him for some nefarious purpose. And then, of course, that's when Din then decides, you know what, I'm not giving it to you guys. I'm going to get it to its own kind. And then it's really about the character development, how Din starts to bond with this other being and becomes almost like a father-like figure to him. But yeah, you're right. So even though there's a little bit of Force elements to it, it's really just plot points. It's not characters, like you said. It's not lightsaber battles and all that. With Andor, though, this is really more, I think, ultimately about telling the story of how the rebellion was built through this character, through the eyes of Andor. You know, you're using Andor to tell the story of how the rebellion was built and all that. And for that, you don't need Jedi or Sith to do that.
Right.
He says they're not going to... He says, we're not going to see Vader, but an Inquisitor, maybe. So... And Ronaldo's full of these type of questions today. Because, okay, maybe an Inquisitor... But I don't think so, because why would you see an Inquisitor? There's no Jedi to hunt. You know, the Inquisitors had nothing to do with the military part of the Empire. Their sole purpose was dispatched to pretty much clean up the mess after Order 66. They have nothing to do with the military operations. They're not going to stand in. They're not generals. It's not like, you know, they're going to run anything. Yes, they did come in, like with Governor Price and all that stuff. You saw her have a couple of Inquisitors. But again, that was because they knew about Ezra and Kanan and things like that, and they knew the crew of the Ghost. And see, Inquisitors you're probably going to see in Ahsoka, if they're still around. I mean, they might have some. You know, maybe Thrawn reactivated them. I don't know. But if you're going to see them, that's where they'll be. And, of course, speaking of which, he says, here's a question. Do you think we'll see Thrawn? Now, that one's intriguing. That one's intriguing because I could see them using Thrawn in this as your big villain bad guy. Because remember, he's around during this time. They sort of retcon the Thrawn thing. In the original thing with the expanded universe, with Timothy Zahn's original Thrawn trilogy, which of course kicked off the expanded universe, you didn't see him. You saw him after Return of the Jedi. He kind of... You knew he was around, but he really rose to prominence then. Well, here, and it isn't really a retcon because, and I've said this a million times too, you could actually marry the new canon of Thrawn versus what they did in the expanded universe, and you wouldn't really have to adjust too much. So during this time period, they could do Thrawn.
I don't know, though. Because if you think about it, Rebels takes place before Rogue One.
Yeah.
So Thrawn had already disappeared with Ezra.
But
so
it depends on how...
depending on when Andor takes place,
which
that's
is...
the key. Is Well, what I'm saying is like if it's
I'm looking it
because
up.
it could have that overlap. You see what I'm saying? Like it could be.
Oh, you bring up a good point. I didn't think
You know
about
what I
that
mean?
Ezra Bridger thing. I forgot about that. So yeah, you're right.
So if it takes place before
5 years before the events of Rogue One.
5 years before the events of Rogue One.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they in theory they said this show could go 5 seasons. So
Okay, and Rebels takes place 5 years before the Battle of Yavin. I'm not gonna make this easy. Well, okay. So if it's 5 years before the Battle of Yavin,
so that's A New Hope.
yeah. Well, it ends. So Rebels. Okay, so this is the thing. It begins 5 years before the Battle of Yavin and ends in 0. In other words, it ends at A New Hope. So, yeah, there's overlap there.
Yeah.
So
That's what I'm saying,
basically,
like, if it's
Andor and Rebels, it looks like. I mean, it pretty much looks like it takes place roughly at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Roughly at the same time. So, in that case, you could. Because like you said, it's at the end that we see that. And I think that whole storyline, honestly, I think that's another retcon thing. I think it's another one of those, okay, well, why don't we see Thrawn in the original trilogy? And again, I don't necessarily think...
for that, though.
Hmm?
At least you have an answer for that, though.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what they did. That's what they keep doing. They keep retconning. Well, why didn't we see Saw Gerrera? Why didn't we see Ahsoka? Why didn't we see all these prominent characters that very clearly would have been around during that time? So you got to explain where they went. Now, I often said that you don't really have to. You could just not explain it, or you can just explain it some other way. But I think in some cases it's probably good because then you have definitive knowledge and you can say, okay, and it can, like in the case of this Thrawn Ezra Bridger thing, it could actually spearhead other stories like it's about to in the Ahsoka series. All right. So let's roll this trailer in one more time, and hope that it doesn't generate any copyright strike. Like I said, I think the reason why Disney, because Disney is the one that actually flagged last week's episode, the reason why they did it, I think, because look, there's all these reaction trailers, but this trailer was officially released. And the rule is if it's on YouTube and you're reacting to it, it's cool. But the leaked trailer was not released, and so I think that they wanted to shut that down. But we'll see. Anyway, if it ends up being edited, you'll know why. So let's react to this thing. Or as, go ahead, the Emperor would say,
roll it again.
That almost looks like the planet Galen Erso was on.
Mm-hmm.
Although they had that's such a cool shot to me.
Man, amazing.
I always wanted to see the Star Destroyers in atmosphere.
To steal from the Empire? To just walk in like you belong? They're so proud of themselves. So
see, who's
fat
that
and
guy?
Satisfied. They can't imagine that someone like me would ever get inside their house.
Cassian Andor. The Empire is choking us so slowly. We're starting not to notice. What I'm asking is this. Wouldn't you rather give it all to something real?
So that's his recruitment into the rebellion, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I need all the heroes I can get.
For the
Two
greater good.
tubes.
And the X-Wing.
Call
Yeah.
it what you will.
Let's call it.
And I think that one dude was the one in Rogue One that was always,
There's fermenting out there, son. Pockets of
fermenting.
I wonder if that's supposed to be a Mahdi. Admiral Mahdi from, like, the original trilogy. And I wonder if that's Ray Sloan.
Or are you with these?
I could be Ray Sloan.
You're slipping.
I'm not slipping. I've just been hiding for too long.
As long as everyone thinks I'm an irritation, there's a good chance they'll miss what I'm really doing.
What are you really doing?
This is what
I
revolution
wonder if that's supposed to be
looks
Chancellor
like.
Valorum.
I'm tired of
No, it can't be. I just thought maybe he was kind of mad at Palpatine. So yeah, I mean, there's just like a lot of cool stuff in that trailer, and things that I think definitely there's certain characters in there that you sort of recognize, and you're like, I wonder if they're trying to make it this person or that person. But, you know, we don't know. And I think that one guy that is always with him is the same one in Rogue One. That, you know which guy I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that wanted Jyn Erso arrested or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be cool, though. I think it's going to be cool. I think it's going to have, like I said, the tone of it, the look of it. I think it's going to have all the suspense. I think it's really going to really give us real insight into the formation of the rebellion. So it's really gonna. So
I guess that's your final thoughts, right? Is that basically your final thoughts? Oh man, I kicked my light out again. Man, I always do that. Let me see if I can feel it. I mean, we're about to wrap the show up anyway. There we go. But I gotta watch where I put my feet, people. It's a thing. It's a fragile little universe I have going on over here. You know, it's sort of like, I mean, because this was meant to be a temporary studio thing. I'm trying to build our actual podcast studio that he and I will be live in. This wasn't really supposed to be going on this long. So I've got like 2 battery-powered lights here. I'm really living dangerously. But so yeah, so is that basically what your final thoughts on the whole thing? I mean, I would echo the same thing. To me, this could be a prequel to Rogue One easily. And I don't mean in the obvious way. I mean in the look of it, the feel of it, the cinematography, all of the elements of it feel like an extension of Rogue One. And I think that they did that purposely, and that's why they didn't use the volume stage, was because it wouldn't feel like Rogue One then.
True.
And I also think that they did that because they didn't want it to feel like the other series, because one of the biggest complaints that everybody has about the volume right now is they're almost like cookie cutter at this point. Each of the shows that are shot on it are starting to feel like each other. And that was really, well, a lot of people blame the volume stage for some of the issues with Obi-Wan, but that's really more budget. Because, look, Mandalorian was amazing. Book of Boba Fett had a lot of really cool things, too. It's just, you know, if you short the budget, even though you have this really cool stage that's got this great technology, if you can't afford to use it all the time, then, you know, you have to do things like have Vader and Obi-Wan, this duel of the century, happen in a couple of, like, sandhills or something. You know, they could have shot that on a general soundstage, and, I mean, it wasn't exactly the most spectacular visuals, let's just put it that way. The second battle, sure, but not the first one. So, yeah, I would say that this trailer basically did. I think I can speak for you on this one. This trailer basically did what a trailer is supposed to do. And that is get you pumped up for the show and give you a little bit of a feel of what to expect when you're watching this thing. And of course, it goes without saying, but I'll remind everybody that we will be doing reviews of the show.
Oh, yeah.
I honestly hope that these shows are only, maybe 30 minutes or something, just because the first episode that we do with the review is going to have to be basically reviewing 3 episodes at once. If that's 3 hours of content, that's going to be a really long review on our part, and we're really going to have to take some serious notes because even Obi-Wan, even trying to watch it, it's like, man, because we try to make this more of a discussion, like you're just getting together and talking about it. I don't want to do this thing to where I'm writing all these notes, and it's not like that kind of show.
Scene by scene type thing.
Right. Well, that
general
too.
concept.
General concept, almost like, hey, did you watch this last night? Yeah, and then you just start talking about it. That's basically the vibe of our show. That's what makes us different than other YouTube shows out there. A lot of people that cover all the same Star Wars stuff, but we try to do it in more of a discussion context, and we're including you on that. And so to that end, if you like that kind of content, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we come to you guys live every Monday and Friday at 8 o'clock, and you're not going to want to miss a show. So you're going to want to hit that notification bell. And you can even have personalized notifications. So you don't have to be notified for every episode, although why wouldn't you want to be? I think we're interesting. But also, if you like this video and you want to support the channel, hit that like button, because that really helps out. The algorithm really likes when a video has a lot of likes on it, and it puts it in front of more people, and it helps us to expand. And then, of course, if you want, we have we're part of the buymeacoffee.com program, where you can make a one-time donation, or you can subscribe to some of our packages. Of course, we altered it a little, being Star Wars fans. It's Buy Me a Blue Milk. As you know, much like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, we love our blue milk. And so, to that end, we really, we haven't really had to. What are we talking about Monday? Is there anything that jumps out that we should talk about?
I don't know. We'll have to
see. You're just gonna have to watch Monday. I will say this though. I've been looking at some of these. There's a lot of these tier maker things. Apps and software and stuff like that. So now if we want to do something like, I don't know, top 10 most powerful, or not even top 10, we just pick like the most powerful Sith Lords or something like that. We can actually have it to where we're moving the pictures, and this guy's like super powerful, this guy's like an A or B or C or whatever. So I've been looking into that. I might want to experiment with that, because that would actually be fun, because instead of us just counting down a list or something like that, you can actually help us make it. Like, we can all make this list together. You guys can chime in. We can discuss, debate it or whatever, and then go, okay, we're going to put this guy in this category and everything. And we could do a lot of those. And so maybe when we're not reviewing shows, or if there's we could definitely do that as a Monday thing. Or, I don't know. Maybe that could also be something when we keep promising all this extra content. That could be an extra content thing that we put up. But either way, you're going to have to watch us to find out. So hopefully we see you guys back here Monday night at 8 o'clock, where we'll be talking about something Star Wars related. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.